story. So here's Oliver Porter.
Well, thank you so very much. It is an absolute privilege to be here speaking with people from around the world who are so dedicated to the cause of liberty. Not only dedicated, but learned in the cause of liberty. And I've had the opportunity to speak in several other countries, but never to such a diverse group. And I wonder, Ken or Lee, does anyone know how many nationalities are represented here? It's all right.
I think it's near 30.
Must be at least 30 countries here, and it's an amazing assemblage. And again, it is an absolute privilege to speak to you. And an amazing rescue effort is underway at this point. As my granddaughter I see coming in has gone to retrieve my glasses that I forgot this morning, and which I really may need before this is over. Thank you, hon. Hope you're not totally worn out. And since I have mentioned, let me introduce to you, take a personal privilege of introducing to you my daughter and granddaughter, Tamlin and Tira Collins, daughter and granddaughter. My daughter is a Methodist minister, which to many of you in other countries you would not understand a female being a minister or priest. She is a Methodist minister in the United States. And my granddaughter works in the cesspool of socialism in America, Washington, D.C. And as a lone conservative in that entire city, I think she deserves a lot of praise. My subject, as printed, is contract cities, local government that operates like a well-run business. Ken asked me to submit several titles. That was the most descriptive of my talk, but the one I liked best was Bureaucracy, the Cancer of Government. And as I go through this, you'll understand why I have that feeling. It's going to be necessary, I think, before I begin to tell you the story of Sandy Springs, that we have some definitions, because all of us come from different countries with different governmental structures, and as I talk about something, maybe you'll understand better if we start at the beginning. In America, we have 3 tiers of government. There is the federal government, which you may call central or your national government. It is the overarching government. That's the first tier. America was founding fathers were, in my opinion, genius when they assembled to create our country. Their wisdom, their insight. If you are a person of faith at all, I think you might think that there was divine intervention that took place when they came together to create the country. And we have messed up that start a lot now, I think. But anyway, enough of my political ideas. Let me move on. The second tier of government is we have states. You may have provinces, you may have departments, you may have something, but it is a regional or smaller area of government than is the overarching national government. And the final tier we call counties, cities, townships, municipalities, what have you. But the definition there is local government. It is the final provider of services that affect your daily lives. It is that vital link that provides your roads, your police, fire, water, sewerage, determines your planning and zoning. It is really the most affecting government in terms of your everyday lives. And it is that area, that third tier, that I'm going to be talking about with you this morning. Much smaller government, but in total, a huge, huge part of your country's government. I really have 2 separate topics to address under the same heading. One is the value of bringing government as close to the people as possible. And this is the most important thing in terms of ensuring individual freedom. When you can, if you could be one-on-one, you and the mayor of your city, you could pretty well get your ideas across. If there are 100 of you or 1,000 of you, you still can. If you're talking about 1 million people going to one politician, you don't get your ideas across. So bringing government close to the people is very important in terms of individual liberty. The second is, I'm going to be talking about an alternative to the traditional bureaucratic form of government that can be much more efficient, much more cost-effective way of providing services. And to the extent that you can cut costs of government, you leave more money with the individuals to be used at their own discretion, and that too is more freedom, means more freedom. So I'll be talking about both of those aspects as we get into the story of Sandy Springs. The history of Sandy Springs went back 30 years before the founding. It was a community, an existing community, unincorporated in a huge county of over 900,000 people. Sandy Springs was not well represented in that we had only one representative for 180,000 people, didn't even live in our area. We were heavily taxed, and our money was being spent in other parts of the county. So for 30 years, the people of Sandy Springs petitioned our state legislature for a bill that would enable us to just vote on having a city, not even to form it, but to just vote on having a city, a referendum. For 30 years, we persisted in trying to do that. And for 30 years, we were rejected by the political party that had been in power for over 100 years. They simply said it's not going to happen. Speaker of the House said, "Over my dead body." One of the senators rose in the well of the Senate to speak and said, "Sandy Springs will become a city when pigs fly." We rubbed his nose in that a little bit later when the governor came out to sign the bill. We presented him with a little mechanical pig flying. And that sort of became our symbol of freedom, as a flying pig. But we did. We fought, and we had a very persistent lady, PhD in economics, who ultimately became the mayor of the city. She drove this battle unendingly for 30 years to try to get us the freedom to determine whether we wanted to manage our own destiny or not. During that period, I came on the committee, and I won't even begin to go through all why, but about 8 years before the city was formed, I joined the committee. And it was very frustrating because primarily we were focused on lobbying to get our bill through. We had no success. But I had not been on the committee long when I sort of raised the question, well, if we had a city, what would it be like? And everybody said, well, we're just fighting to get a city. So I said, but no, we need to know what it is we're fighting for, so how do we do that? And they said, well, we'd have to have a charter. And I said, how do we get a charter? And they said, well, we have to, I guess, form a charter commission. And I said, okay. And they said, well, if you want one, you form it and you chair it. So I became the chairman of the committee, and it was like writing the original Constitution of the United States. Now, that may sound a little grandiose, but there had not been a new city in Georgia in 50 years. So there was no blueprint as to how to do this. So we did a lot of research and study and worked hard as a charter commission, which I formed from representatives around the city. And we created a charter for the city, which became a part then of the bill that we were continuing to ask the legislature to pass. And I may say that in Georgia, the legislature does control local governments. They can make them, they can break them, they can modify their charters. That's not true in all states. It's very different. In Texas, for instance, 50 people can sign a petition and start a city, just like that. So, but in our state, it is a creature of the legislature. So we had a charter. We now have that in our bill, and what a charter does basically is it describes the authority of the city, describes the responsibilities of the city, the limitations of the city. It says when you'll have elections and all of those sort of things. So we now have a bill that's fairly substantial with a charter. And we went along, and nothing happened in the legislature. And then in 2002, the opposition party gained both the Senate and the governorship, all but the House of Representatives. And we thought, we may get our bill, and we were quickly moving. And I said, well, we now know what kind of city, but how are we going to implement? How are we going to make this thing start? How will it happen? And again, the answer was sort of, well, we're focused on legislation. So I went home from the meeting, literally took out a pad of paper and wrote out a plan for how to start a city. Flow charts, time, so forth, critical paths. And I brought it in, and the committee passed it, and then we didn't get the bill. The next year, I put a new date on it, and the committee passed it, and we didn't get the bill. 2004 arrived. An upheaval politically in the state. The opposition party took the House of Representatives in November, and they told us, your bill will be bill number 1, the first bill we passed. Only problem was now we had no time. The bill also called for the city to be formed on December 1st, 2005. It did not actually pass the legislature until April. The governor did not sign it until May, when we gave him the pink flying pig. And so we only had less than half a year to form a city for 100,000 people. Now let me explain again what I mean by forming a city. We were an existing community. We were not starting a whole new city. We were an existing community of 100,000 people that had been served by a larger county. So we're now incorporating and taking on all of the responsibilities for service. Administration, accounting, public relations, information technology, the roads and sidewalks, transportation design, traffic lights, community development, which to us means planning and zoning and permitting and code enforcement of enforcing those codes, parks and recreation, all of those types of things, everything except public safety, which included to us police, fire, and the courts, were going to have to be provided. We would still provide those also, but in a different way. So we had a very short time to make this city happen, and I had been asked, because I had created this simple plan, to take responsibility for starting the city. They said, you're going to be our interim city manager, a volunteer, of course, not paid, but you're going to spend the time, whatever it is necessary, to create this city. My first act was what you would normally expect. I created task forces of volunteers, 12 task forces, because I had identified 12 areas of service. I have enumerated most of those to you that we needed. And I created these volunteer task forces, and fortunately we had some very dedicated and very intelligent, resourceful people serve on those committees. They numbered up to about 120 people actively working with me to try to decide how to create the city. But they were all focused on creating a traditional city. That is one like all others, with which you have your own employees, you own your equipment, or you lease it, you own your building, you lease. They were all focused in that area because I'd given them a 4-part charge. 1, what is the county now doing for us? What level of service are we getting? 2, what is that costing? Those were not easy numbers to get because the county was very much against what we were planning to do and not very forthcoming. Secondly, what is it we really want as opposed to what we've been getting? And 2, what would that cost us by looking at other cities and counties around to see what costs they had? So they were diligently working on that, and it only took me a matter of about 2 months to decide that it was impossible. It was impossible to create a traditional city. The reason being that the bill that was passed provided us with no authority. No one could hire anyone, buy any equipment, lease it, do it, make a contract. There was no authority until 1 minute after midnight of December 1st, when the new city council would be in effect. They then had the authority. But how do you go from nothing in 1 minute to a functioning city, a fully functioning city of 100,000 people? It wasn't possible. So I began to search for alternatives. And I have told many people that the concept I came up with was not genius, it was simply necessity, which is what often happens. But I suppose it was my corporate background that led me to look to private industry as a possible solution for a problem. So I sat down on my own and I wrote a letter, short letter, to 24 major national and international companies that I thought might be able to provide this type of service to us. I learned from my corporate background to start at the top. I wrote to CEOs and presidents. You don't go at the bottom with something like this. Sent this letter off, and it had two questions. One, here's a list of these 12 areas of service. Where have you done any of these for any other local government or even a state or military? Where have you provided this service? I want to know if you can do it. That was fairly straightforward. The second question was one that was not designed to warm the heart of a CEO. It was, will you spend the millions of dollars to set up this city without a contract? Surprisingly, I got 12 answers out of the 24. And each of them identified one or more areas that they had provided service. Some of them sort of stretched the truth a little bit in that answer, but it gave me a feeling that there were people out there who could do this. As to the second question, would you do it without a contract? No one said yes. But there was some language like, we can talk about it, we'll put it on the table, we'll negotiate. Enough of that to give me confidence that I could go forward. And I did. Again, no one, by the way, in the community knew that I had even sent these letters out, other than the lady who chaired the committee. So it gave me enough confidence that I sat down and in my home office began to draw up RFPs. Now, again, a definition, if you're not familiar with that, it's a request for proposal, and it's what you send out to private companies to ask them to bid, and these are the specifications, what you want them to bid on, and how they should do it, and so forth. They were massive. They were about this thick, the RFPs that I produced. I wanted to issue those immediately. My volunteer legal counsel was advising against it, saying I was going to get myself in trouble, which I really didn't care. What are they going to do? Sue and take the city away? I don't know. But there was a new development coming. One of the things the bill provided for was that the governor should appoint a commission on Sandy Springs, and its purpose was to assist in the creation of the city. Unfortunately, once again, there was no authority with it. It was simply to be advisory and to assist. Well, the governor did it, and we had anticipated when we put that in the bill that he would choose people from the organizing committee, people who knew what was going on. No, the governor, being political, appointed two people who didn't even live in our city, two who in the city who had nothing to do with the effort, and myself. So when we gathered but they did ask me to convene the meeting, and on June the 29th, we gathered for the first meeting of the Governor's Commission. They did two significant things. First, because I was the only one who even knew what was going on, they elected me chairman. And secondly, as chairman, I laid in front of them that stack of RFPs about this thick and said, you have to pass these tonight without reading them. Those of you who are in the United States will understand that it's a Pelosiism. But this smart group did read them later, and also did one thing that we didn't have in our national government. I told them that there was nothing in there that could not be amended and changed once they had gotten to it. But I said, we have no time. It is June the 23rd. We have to have a functioning city for 100,000 people December 1st, 5 months away. We have no time to dilly. So they passed that, and we began the process then. The next day, I issued those RFPs, and we began the process of praying that companies would bid on our business, because nothing like this had been done. Nothing this broader scale or in this larger city had ever been done in the United States to serve a city totally with private industry. And once again, I say totally except for public safety. We did not intend to do that with private industry, the police, the fire, the courts. However, the backroom operations for even those public safety functions, by that I mean the record keeping, all of the paperwork, computer work to back up those operations was included in the contract and was provided by private industry for police and fire and the courts. So we issued those. It takes a good deal of time to work through the process of the companies having the opportunity to understand those and to ask questions and then to prepare their bids. It is a costly process for them. So we actually did not select a company to provide our services until September 29th. December 1st looms tomorrow. I had told that Governor's Commission also why we need to go so fast was that every second was like a crack of thunder to me. It was coming so soon. So we came back to the Governor's Commission. And by the way, I was in a very useful position. As city manager, I was presenting plans to a Governor's Commission, which I chaired. So it facilitated the action a good deal to be presenting things to myself. But on September 29th, we presented a recommendation and a tentative contract to the Governor's Commission. They could not approve it. They could only approve it for the purpose of passing it along to the future City Council. But they did that, and it became de facto, this is what we're going to do at that point. There was no turning back. Then we followed a period of additional contract negotiation and implementation. In just a few short months, the company that won the contract was able to put together a beautifully functioning city. So that on December 1, our first council meeting was at 1 minute after midnight, and there were legal reasons for that I won't go into. And when that council sat down, they had in front of them laptops loaded with their agenda, with all the background of every issue. They had around them a fully, smoothly running, functional city at 1 minute after midnight. So that was the first success, I guess, of this effort. It has now been in existence for almost 10 years, and it is still running as a major success. I want to share with you some of the reasons that I say it's a success. I judge the success of government in two simple ways. One, efficiency, and two, responsiveness. How does it respond to the needs of the people? Does it even hear the needs of the people? As I indicated earlier, we have now brought the government closer to the people. Instead of one person representing 180,000, we now have one person representing about 15,000. Instead of a person representing us who didn't even live in our community, in the initial election, we elected city council, 6 of them. No one lived more than 2 miles from one of their constituents, no more than 2 miles. And I had gone around telling the people when we were asking them to vote, and I'll speak to the referendum in a minute, that one of the features of this was, with regard to our leadership, we would be able to get our hands around their necks. And that became the case, and in fact, some of them may have some bruise marks from hands around their necks. But before, we couldn't be heard at all. And now people are actively involved in their community because they know they have the opportunity to be heard, they have the opportunity to influence, to exercise their individual liberty. So it turned out that we have fulfilled our one part of the charge of being responsive to the people. That is indicated in a number of ways. We've done a lot of polls, surveys to determine citizen satisfaction. There have been national polls in which we were included on citizen satisfaction. In almost every case, our city finishes in the top 10% of satisfaction ratings. Another indication, and I think maybe one of the most significant ones, is that in the first election following the original election, 4 years later, no incumbent council person got less than 84% of the vote. That's amazing in the States. It really is. But an even more amazing number was that our referendum, I mentioned earlier, we had to have a vote. It did not occur until June the 8th, again, only a few months before the city. So everything I had done up till that point could have been thrown away. But in that election, no one got less than 84%, so the political indications were people were very happy. Second major indicator is that others have now followed. Others have followed us in doing this. But let me speak to the efficiency side. Here's what financially happened. In those 10 years, the city has not raised the tax rate at all. Not at all. Right through the recession when other governments were hurting badly, no increase in taxes, and we didn't increase any taxes to start the city from what they had already been paying through the county. So we've never had a tax increase. In spite of that, we've been able to spend 20% of our operating budget on capital improvements. We paved over 170 miles of new roads, equivalent sidewalks. We built national award-winning parks. We have had a great capital improvement program coming out of the savings generated by the private industry. Third, we have no debt. No debt. And we don't intend to have any debt. We may have some coming with a massive redevelopment of the downtown area, may create some, but even there we want public-private partnerships to bear a lot of it. But maybe the most important of all is we have no long-term liabilities for pensions and other benefits, and we never will have. And that is the thing that is killing cities, governments around our country and in other countries. Hiroshi spoke yesterday in accounting about his idea of calling unfunded liabilities future tax. And it's a great idea because it is very, very descriptive of what it is. People don't know it's there, but it is a future tax. I was working with one new city that was in great financial difficulty, hoping to convert to the model. And when I called their acting finance director and asked for how much is your unfunded liabilities, he didn't know what I was talking about. The finance director. I finally got to the mayor, found out it's $56 million that they will ultimately have to pay it as a future tax. So, from all those scores, no tax increase, no debt, no future liabilities, increased capital expenditures, it is a raving success as a government. The final proof of the pudding is that others have looked at it and are copying. In the years that followed, the next year, 2 more cities were formed. They followed the model. I was their principal advisor. The third year, another. And then skipped 2 years and another. So in a 3-year period, we had 5 new cities formed who were following this model. And obviously, they would not have done it, not gone to private contracting, not formed new cities if they had not viewed us as a success. We've been trying to spread this. It is just as applicable to counties as it is to cities. Whoever is your local provider of service, it is applicable there. It can be done in other countries. The companies I have dealt with, many of them are international, may already have offices in your country or may be willing to go there. You have large companies in most of your countries that could do it if they wanted to explain to them that it is a success and here's how it goes, and it is very profitable to you. And because we wanted the companies to make a profit. From the very beginning, we wanted them to make a profit. If they don't make a profit, they're not going to give us good service. And they can do that and still undercut. Now you may be saying, when I say less costly, what do you mean? I mean cutting the cost of your government today by 10 to 40%. We have done that, and we have done a lot more studies that show it can be done. There is only one problem, one hurdle that stands in the way of you converting your government to a public-private partnership or a contract city, whatever you want to call it, and being successful in cutting your costs and being responsive to the people. There is one thing that stands in the way. It's called politics. Politics. Your political leaders, everyone's political leaders are risk averse. They're elected under one system. They don't want to stick their necks out, no matter how good it is for the citizens, and take the risk of doing something dramatically different from the others around them. So, politics is the problem. If you are interested at all in seeing this concept expanded into your area. Let me tell you what is needed. At the end of and I did want to mention that I've written 3 books on it. The first one is Creating the New City of Sandy Springs. The second one is concerns called Public-Private Partnerships for Local Governments. This is what you should do as an existing government. The third was published in Japan, and believe it or not, it contains most of these other 2 large books translated into Japanese. I think their language is much more efficient than ours. And the fourth and most recent was done in conjunction with the collaboration with the University Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala, which is a hotbed of free enterprise in the middle of a socialist part of the world. They have published with me an online version of equivalent of about 30 pages that concisely tells you about all of this. And in addition, I have these small pamphlets that I printed up that are just foldable. You can stick in your pocket and read them on the airplane, what have you, if you'd like those. So, what I said at the end of the first book, and this was early in the process, is that all that we need to move on to get people to consider this alternative is 2 things. One is data that shows it works. And I had Georgia Tech University, which is one of the major universities in America, undertake a study of that in which they compared 5 new cities to 5 comparable cities in size and other demographics using traditional government bureaucracy. In each case, the contract city won, and the average by which they won in those 5 pairings was 48% less costly. So we have the actual history, though, of these cities and what they've done, so we now have the data. The second thing I said is required is a hero or a heroine. Someone, a leader, a mayor, a council person, a community leader, someone who will simply take up the banner and not say, we have to do this, but say, we have to look at this. We have done traditional government in the United States, local government, the same way for over 100 years. My mother, we celebrated her 100th birthday 2 weeks ago. She tells me there is nothing that is the same that 100 years ago that is now. But government is. We're still running it the same lousy way. And all we're asking people to do is take this data, take this, I'm available to help you. Anywhere in the world, I'm available. My email is there. I travel to try to tell this story because I have said this is not a vocation for me. This is an obsession. We can change local government around the world, and if we can change local government, just maybe it will begin to filter up. I can't do anything about federal government, and I can't do anything about state. But we can change local government, and maybe the effects and the benefits of that can begin to filter up the system, and we can change bigger government. So if you're interested, if you want to be a hero, or if you know someone who is willing to be a hero, then put them in touch with me, and we can help them. These books were not written as I'm an engineer by training. I'm not a writer. I started putting them together as bits of information to give to other cities, and it just grew. And so it's a cookbook. All you need to know about how to start a city. Charters, RFPs, contracts, legislation, etc. It's all in there, along with some other verbiage. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I would hope you might take a pamphlet here, and I would be most happy to answer questions. In fact, I much prefer questions to having to talk. So we have some time. Ken?
Yeah, I'd like to start off one question with, you mentioned responsiveness of services. I guess it matters when you've privatized all of your services and you can fire somebody if they don't perform. Can you give it a good example, like in the emergency services or something like that, where responsiveness improved tremendously just because they have the incentive to perform?
Good. If I'd had another 30 minutes, I would have described all of that in detail. But, for instance, he mentioned responsiveness in terms of before the city was created, they had done the standard survey. The response time for police and fire in our community was 22 minutes. The recommended national level is, I believe, 4 to 6 minutes. 22 minutes. I asked him not to publish the study because a burglar, a robber, could know he could hit my house and he'd be in Canada before the police got there. So it went from that to afterwards we now have a 4-minute response time. The county provided us with, they said, 4 policemen on duty at any time, which with shifts of 3 a day, it means they were devoting 12 people to us. We don't know because we never saw them. There were so few. We now have a police force of 135 people. We have a fire department of 80 some odd people. We have new equipment, new facilities. All of that paid for, not with debt, but out of the savings from the operations that were provided by the private company. So responsiveness in that way. Another way in which we respond and wrote into the contract, we were sick and tired of dialing a public office and getting a menu that says dial this and dial this number and do that, and you end up back where you were. We demanded a live person to answer the phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A live person will pick up and answer your phone. More than that, they will answer your question. If they cannot, they will direct you, transfer you to the department which can. But even more importantly, if it were, say, I have a pothole, a hole in my road I need fixed, they issue right then a work order from their station that goes to that department, initiating the action. It goes to the mayor. It goes to the council person for your district. There's a guaranteed response on that in 2 days. If it is what we call an emergency, not a police or fire emergency, a 911 service as we call it. If it is just maybe someone's cutting down trees across the street from me on the lot and I don't think they should be allowed to, 2-hour response time. So 24/7 live person, you get a response. And the final phase of that is when the work order is completed, that notification goes back to the customer. It goes back to the mayor. It goes back to the council person. This is what we've done. A complete loop of service. That is responsiveness. That is unmatched anywhere in the country. Yeah. And we get all kinds of calls. Time of day, what's the weather, what have you. Yes.
Can you tell us what those other 5 cities are that have taken up the banner, so to speak?
Certainly. The next one was Johns Creek. All of these are in Georgia. I wish we could say there had been more outside the state. Johns Creek, Milton were the first year. The next year was Chattahoochee, Chattahoochee. It's an Indian name, Chattahoochee Hills. Following that was, in the 4th year, was Dunwoody, Dunwoody. And following a year or 2 later was Brookhaven. There was one other small city created, but it's under a different form of legislation that it's not a full-blown city. Currently, in the Georgia legislature this year were 5 bills to create 5 additional cities around the metropolitan Atlanta area primarily. I have had talks with people in many other states. I've studied, particularly in Texas, Maryland, other places, cities, and we can show, one of the Texas cities, we had savings of $102 to $160 million over a 6-year contract. This is real money. This is taking their existing budget and then coming up with the actual contract regression analysis of the actual contracts and seeing what they should pay on a per person basis. It's real. Another one had savings of $36 to $52 million. County in Maryland had equivalent savings of about 25%. Generally, the savings are in the 20 to 40% range. I had one new city that was in desperate trouble. I went to them and I knew they had not much money, so I said, I will study your city for free. I will do your RFPs, help you through the contract negotiation selection process, help them all for free. If you will, but if your savings are over 10%, I want 1% of your savings. So this is money you would not have had. You'll still have 99% of it. They voted it down. Politically, it's a mess. But anyway, short answer.
I have a question.
Yes.
Oliver, you privatized most of the city, the traffic department, the parks department,
all of that,
the permitting department,
yes,
calling.
Yes.
So much of the city is privately run.
Basically everything except police, fire, and the courts.
Do you think it would have been a good idea to privatize police, fire, and courts?
Probably so. There were two major reasons why we did not do public safety. One is liability. The city has sovereign immunity under state law, and in most states it cannot be sued. So if it had a truck that went out and struck someone else, it could not be sued for that. Private company can. It shouldn't be because it's providing the city's, performing for the city, but it does not have sovereign immunity. I have tried to get a bill entered that would give the private companies that provided more than 50% of the services sovereign immunity, but I don't know if I'll ever get that passed. So it's a big extra cost to have to get insurance for something with as much liability as police and fire. The second one is there was just a general feeling of the community that they preferred having their police and fire as city employees. We started this city with this 100,000 people, only 2 employees. 2 employees. Everything was either contracted still back to the county or contracted private industry. We still had police and fire contracted back to the county at that point, which we eventually were able to take over with the savings that we generated. But we have we have had great success, I guess, in doing everything but police and fire, but the community just seemed to feel that they didn't want to put that in the private industry. And remember what our 2 key objectives are. One is efficiency. We might have improved efficiency by that, but 2 is responsiveness. And then being responsive to that feeling, we did not go to police and fire, but you could. There are companies out there who will do that. I'll take, please, up here, David. Last question.
Holly, as you may know, Australia also is a federalisation.
I've just learned that.
Yeah, but we have over 85% of our tax revenue collected through the central government, and therefore over 50% on average of the state's revenues are made up of federal transfers. Have you given, local governments obviously play a much smaller role than in America, but have you given any thought as to how you would decentralise the economy, that is, increase the size of the local government, decrease the federal government, and also increase these private partnerships when you've already got so much debt at the federal level? How do you get rid of that problem?
You've asked me to go beyond my pay level in answering that. I have a lot of thoughts about how I'd like to fix the federal government and its debt, and I'm sure they're similar to those of a lot of you, but the first thing we need to do is elect a new administration to change all that. No, I can't help you much with that. I can tell you that I think if we begin to improve the efficiency of local government, we quit asking for money from state or federal, and we're able to be efficient enough that we can meet our own needs with even less money than we're now putting into it, I think we just begin to change the tide. We begin to get people to understand that everything is not about handouts from the federal or state government. I went to Japan several times, addressed some large symposia there, business, academic, and government people, and I worked with a city there in anticipation that they would adopt this model. Unfortunately, the earthquake and tsunami hit and everything went out the window at that point, and by the time we got through with that, the mayor had been defeated and he had been the hero. So I have had a little experience in other places. I just learned that you do a good deal of private contracting in Australia, and that is wonderful. But I hope that you will be able to find a way to cut your purse strings to higher level agents. But I started to say in Japan, the situation is particularly difficult. Their cities, we thought we had debt. We don't know what debt is. The average amount that cities in Japan pay in interest is 25% of their operating budget. That's not repayment of debt, that's interest. So that means they're just staying even and getting deeper. And it is because they have basically a draw on the federal government, which they're not repaying. And eventually that has to end. You cannot go on borrowing forever, and the whole thing becomes a bubble and it bursts. And we're headed towards that in the United States. And all I'm trying to do is keep these local governments on a footing. We've had major cities go bankrupt. And it's always because of these unfunded liabilities for pensions. They've given in to union demands and they've granted too much that they could not afford. Again, I say we have zero of that. We have shifted by contracting. We have shifted the burden for pensions and other liabilities of that type to the private company. It's included in their price, and we will never have that as a buildup that drags us down. So I urge you to, if for nothing else, to consider the benefit of shifting those liabilities for future, as Hiroshi would call it, future taxes, shifting those to private industry. I'm sorry I can't answer your question better, but I would have to be more than a genius to solve the problem you propounded.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for your attention.